Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to yet again another fantastic indie creator interview. It's your Cape Crusader Cody, and we're keeping it geekly with our new guest, Matt D. Wilson. We're here to break down Impostor, Syndicate, and everything in between. Matt, welcome to the stream. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, Cody. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt is well known for Everything Will Be Okay from Caliber Comics, Supreme Villainy from Talos Press, as well as a host of an awesome podcast, War Rocket Ajax podcast. I mean, it seems like you have your hand in a little bit of everything. So, Matt, before we dive into all of that, let's begin with the basics and start with who you are and how you got into creating comics.
Yeah, I have wanted to make comics for a long, long time, but you're not wrong when you say I have a hand in a little bit of everything, because when I was a teenager or a kid, I wanted to be a comic book writer. I wanted to write comedy essays. I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to, I didn't know that I wanted to be a podcaster, but I maybe wanted to be a talk show host. Mm-hmm. I wanted to do all of those things and had a really hard time deciding which one I wanted to be. So I ended up doing it all. I've written comedy essays online. You mentioned Supreme Villainy, that and the other two King Oblivion PhD books were started as a website I created to write comedy essays. After I stopped working at Cracked, I worked at Cracked for a while in the mid 2000s. I've been a comics journalist. I've done so many things, and I've always wanted to do comics, but I've never had the artistic talent to do anything but the writing part. Mm-hmm. I used to draw a lot as a kid, and so many other kids were so far ahead of me in terms of artistic talent that I decided I was just going to stick to the writing part. And that's great, but it also makes it more difficult to get out there and make your own comics. So it took until about, I guess, 10 or 11 years ago for me to actually get my foot in the door in making comics. I met some other people who were making them, writers and artists, and kind of got into a community of comics creators. And I started working with an artist named Kevin Warren on a web comic of my first comic, Copernicus Jones, Robot Detective.
I love the name.
Yeah, that ran for a web comic as a web comic for a while, and then as I was podcasting and meeting more people, I sort of on the fly pitched that idea to Monkey Brain Comics. And then it became a digitally published Monkey Brain comic. So wow, that was my first foray into making my own comics, which was something I, again, had wanted to do for a really long time. And since then, it's been kind of making comics in between other projects and doing other things. So they don't come out all that frequently. Copernicus Jones was, several years, like 2013, 2014. Then Everything Will Be Okay. We kickstarted that in 2018, and Caliber released it in 2020. And now here we are at Impostor Syndicate, a comic, my first idea for a comic that I had in 2003. Mm-hmm. So it's been a long journey.
That's so awesome. So do you feel like the comic journalism and podcasting help like propel you a little bit within the comic creation process? Like, since you kind of already had your foot in the door, just on a different side of the door?
Yes, absolutely. I've always wanted to be really careful, especially, when I used to write for Comics Alliance. I never wanted to ask anybody during an interview, or if I was at a convention as a member of the press, I never wanted to be like, "Hey, I got ideas for books. You should publish my books."
Yeah.
Because that's a conflict of interest. But it did help me meet people, and the podcast War Rocket Ajax has certainly helped me meet people. And through meeting people who were already kind of established in comics. I've gotten some opportunities, and I've also met people who are just getting started who are looking for opportunities. And I can say, well, I'm not a huge name, but if we work together, maybe we can get somewhere with this. Cause you know, I've got a little bit of cachet through podcasting and the other work I've done. So the artist on Everything Will Be Okay and Impostor Syndicate, Rodrigo Vargas, was just a listener of War Rocket Ajax.
That is so cool.
Yeah, he lives in Chile, and he emailed me out of the blue. This is probably 5 or 6 years ago now. Oh no, it's more like 7 years ago. You lose track of time after a while.
Yeah.
But he emailed me like 7 or 8 years ago and said, I'm an artist. I'm trying to get more attention for my work. Is there anything you would want me to do? And at the time we were doing like pinups for Patreon. And it seemed like he wanted to do a Patreon pinup. And I said, why don't we make a comic together? And that was the start of making Everything Will Be Okay together. So I'm like the worst networker in the world. It was like only a few years ago that I realized that you go to comic conventions as a creator, not to like sit at your table and sell books, but to meet people.
Yes. Yeah.
And network. And so I'm not good at it, but I sort of organically networked through podcasting and journalism stuff too over time. So it undoubtedly it helped me. Yeah.
So what was that comic like that you worked with Rodrigo, the story for it?
You talking about Everything Will Be Okay?
Yeah. Yep.
So that one is essentially me working through every existential fear that I have. So it's very funny that it finally got published in 2020 when everybody's existential fears came true.
Yeah, the world was just burning alive at that time.
Yeah. Because the pitch for that book and sort of the log line for it that's on the back is, what if every possible disaster that could happen happened all at once? And it's like catastrophizing as a comic book. And so it's these characters living in a world where every real disaster, like tornadoes, meteors, volcanoes erupting, earthquakes, floods, are all happening. And then there's also zombies and kaiju and all these fictional disasters happening too at the same time. And so it's about their escape from Earth, and then they go to space and there are disasters in space, and they go to an alternate dimension and there are disasters there. It's like every issue explores a different sort of disaster genre. That's the idea of that book. So it's kind of a high concept, I guess, but I really am proud of that comic. That answers your question, I think, about what that book's about.
Yeah. I think after hearing what they have to go through in that world, I'll never complain about a Monday ever again. Holy crap. Zombies, kaiju, just all of that. It sounds like one nightmarish experience. How was the process working with Rodrigo like, though? This was like your first time kind of getting to do sequential art with him. So how did that look like for you?
We kind of fell into a pattern of working pretty quickly. Rodrigo is incredible. All you have to do is go look at the preview pages for
they are
Impostor
gorgeous,
Syndicate and see that. And he's got tons of ideas. His art is so dynamic. So essentially, before I had ever met Rodrigo, I had scripts for that book and for Impostor Syndicate that I was just holding on to say, when I meet the right artist, I'll send them these scripts and they can make something out of them. And so I sent him the scripts for Everything Will Be Okay and said, if you got any questions about these, if there's anything you want to change or something, you have the eye to present the story. So you let me know if these scripts work for you. And he came back. Every comic book script is a conversation. It's never set in stone, and I don't write as if these are my words; they cannot be altered. I think of it as a conversation with the artist, because I think that's ultimately what they should be. And so, he had some changes. He had some ideas. He said this page could be 6 panels instead of 5, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially he just was like, it clicked with him immediately. He got it. I got the pages back and they looked incredible and we were off to the races. And then with Impostor Syndicate, it's even more simpatico. Rodrigo has added jokes to the book that aren't even in the script.
Oh, that's awesome.
Stuff that's like, the whole idea is it's a superhero satire. It's meant to be kind of, my point of reference for that kind of thing is always the Tick. And he's just adding in little funny things about these ridiculous characters that I'm coming up with that perfectly fits and is funny. And like people have noticed, I did another interview where somebody said, there's a little crocodile that this one character has that I say
thrown against the window. I love it. Yeah.
And the crocodile is not in the script at all. Rodrigo put in the crocodile. And
it was so much chaos. I loved it.
It's so funny. Yeah.
Another thing too that I loved was I'm not exactly sure. What are we? Do we know the protagonist's name, or is that yet to be revealed?
We know his name. His name is John, and which is his stage name.
Mm-hmm.
On page 1 of the book, he says, "My name is John Weston, but that's my work name. My real name is Horace Gorfinkel Jr." And and yeah, he's an actor who has reached the point where he's at the doing children's birthday parties stage of his career.
Mm-hmm.
That's how far he's fallen. He used to do, stage acting and all of that stuff, but now he's portraying a supervillain at kids' birthday parties. And so he jumps at any offer he gets to do anything different. And he happens to get a call from his agent about something she isn't even sure what it is, that turns out to be an offer to be the actual supervillain, the Bonobo.
I love the name.
And so that is essentially the arc of the first issue. Is he gets this offer and he has to decide whether he wants to take it. And talking about exploring fears, everything will be okay is very like big, huge in scope, exploring fears. Impostor Syndicate, in addition to being a very silly superhero satire parody, is also me kind of thinking about my fears as a person who does creative work. Because I think something creative people always worry about, if they've ever seen an episode of Behind the Music or some kind of show documentary about a musician that went bankrupt or something.
Oh yeah.
they worry about signing that contract that they were so excited to sign when they got it, and then they learn about all the downsides to it and all the stuff they didn't know, where they got screwed. And so that's kind of what I'm exploring in Impostor Syndicate, this signing that bad contract.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was reading yesterday. I forgot who it was. It was an artist in the early 90s, but they were talking about how she made like $1 a CD, and her album, she sold like 33 million copies, and how $1 a CD was a high going rate. And I'm like, oh my God. So like out of $20, they're only getting like 50, 75 cents a copy. That is like, you would never have guessed, but then you got to go into like thinking about, well, they take, some of that chunk for advertisement, production. So but it's mind-boggling that they don't even make that much from it. And talking to just tons of creators, it's almost like the same thing for you guys, right? As comic book creators, the full retail price of the book, like you guys only get a little chunk of that compared to what the publishers get.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen a ton of it in comics. I've seen more of it in kind of traditional publishing, but it's never what you imagine it to be when you're 13, 14 years old, thinking about like, I'm gonna get a book published and I'm gonna be rich, because that only happens for a very, very select few people. It's even when you sign a standard contract, you're only getting a fraction, but then there are those really, really awful ones where you essentially get nothing. And I haven't had anything like that happen yet, so I hope I never do.
NDAs can be very scary too, because like,
oh yeah, for sure.
If you don't have a lawyer read over it, it's like, well, I don't know what I'm allowed to talk about. What if I get screwed over and then I can't talk about it? Like,
yeah. The more than NDA, like the non-disclosure agreement, there's also like a lot of contracts have what they call non-disparagement clauses, where you're legally, you can't say anything bad about.
And it's like, you just gotta like hold that fury within. Like, real quick though, we have Mama Geekly over on Facebook stopping in, wanting to know, have you always wanted to do comics? And then when you were talking about how you Impostor, Syndicate, it kind of like relates some of your own fears. She was mentioning that's kind of like Stephen King writing about his nightmares.
Yeah, I have always wanted to do comics in one sense or another. I mean, it's evolved over time, because when I was 9, I really definitely thought I was going to be writing Spider-Man. And part of me still wants to really write Spider-Man, but I also like doing kind of my own original stuff as much or more. So it has always been a thing, even though my idea of what I wanted to do has evolved and changed over time. The idea of Stephen King writing about his nightmares, maybe if I do enough writing, I'll get to kind of my more fantastical nightmares instead of just the fears I experience every day while I'm awake. Because right now it's still just my fears I have as I'm awake. So hopefully I'll do enough work.
Real quick, before we take a look at the Zoop campaign, I am curious, like, how was that transition going from webcomics to like a traditional comic? Did you experience like any hiccups at all, or was it kind of a smooth transition for you?
If anything, the hiccups were with webcomics, because when we did Copernicus Jones as a webcomic, I wrote it essentially as if it were a traditional comic. I wrote it in the format of pages instead of strips. So it ended up translating pretty well to traditional comics, because traditional comics were what I always wanted to do.
Okay.
Way more than webcomics. I always saw webcomics as just kind of a means to doing traditional comics. Not to disparage webcomics at all. Webcomics are an art form on their own. But I never really with Copernicus Jones, I never had the inclination for it to be a webcomic. I tried to do some webcomics before that never really got off the ground. That would have been more straight up webcomics. But it's traditional comics were kind of always my end game. So
I've always heard that webcomics were kind of like a beast within themselves, like just like how to like the format and how to get them going. So I think right now would be a perfect segue. Let's go ahead and pull up the Zoop campaign for Impostor Syndicate and see what we're here campaigning about. We are looking at Impostor Syndicate, currently at $3,917 of a $6,000 goal with 113 supporters and 30 days left to go. Congratulations on like being like right over the halfway point. How are you feeling? You just went live today.
It's great. I think this is the best first day reaction I've ever gotten to one of these projects. This is my third comics comics crowdfunding project. The other two I've done before this for Kickstarters. So I'm elated at that. I think we're not quite at 12 hours. I don't think it's been live for quite 12 hours yet, and we're at almost 2/3. If we could get to 2/3 by 11 o'clock, which would be at the 12-hour mark, I told you before we started, I'm moving the goalposts already.
Yeah.
But like I can't help but to like set those goals in my head. But if that would be incredible if we could get there. So it feels fantastic, and the way people have been sharing it and getting it out there today has been really, really great.
We have Mama Geekly saying congratulations. Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations on killing it. So this is a story about what happens when a supervillain dies on the job, or they just get too old for this shit and retire. Someone has to step up and put the mask on. I love that concept so much. You said this this idea came, to you about 20 years ago. Like, What was some of that inspiration to put an actor in the shoes of a villain?
I don't really know. I think the inspiration, like I said, I loved The Tick when I was younger, the comic and the cartoon. And part of The Tick always was like being a superhero was kind of a job, that was sort of inherent to that and other like comedic takes on superheroes. So I thought about taking that one step further, because one of the tropes of comics that I've always thought about a lot, but I don't see get explored a lot, is how you always see that villain die. You see the Joker go down with a flaming blimp into the bay, or you see Mr. Zsasz fall off a building, or you see all these villains apparently die, and then they just come back somehow with often no explanation as to how they survived that last thing that should have killed them. Or at a minimum, they're like horribly injured to the point where they probably shouldn't be able to walk again. So a thing that's always stuck in my head is like, well, how do they come back? Like, how do they recover from that? How do they survive? And then I think just this thought popped in my head of like, what if they don't survive? What if they just get replaced? But nobody ever knows that they got replaced because they're always wearing a mask, or somebody gets plastic surgery to look like the previous guy or whatever. And so then I got rolling on the idea of like a supervillain dies or retires, but there's some kind of mysterious shadowy organization that wants superheroes and supervillains to keep fighting for whatever reason. And so what if this shadowy organization hires actors to hires actors to be the new supervillains or the replacement supervillains, so that the supervillains and superheroes keep fighting, they keep selling toys and video games and making movies. And in this world, they even do like, stage shows with superheroes.
I love just how meta it is, like how it's like a self-reflective on like how we consume like the media today.
Yeah, it's like this is a world where superheroes are real and exist and are out fighting each other in the street, fighting supervillains in the street all the time.
Throwing crocodiles.
Also, yeah, exactly. But they're also like everything in culture. Not every movie we see is about superheroes, but a lot of them are. And that's kind of how the world of this book is, where it's like actors are portraying superheroes every day. Those superheroes also just happen to be real people. I really don't know. I know why I originally wrote the script in 2003, and I know exactly why it was in 2003. Because I was in college, I was 19, and I looked through the last issue of Marvel, one of the worst comics ever made. But the last issue of Marvel was Marvel announcing it was bringing back the Epic line. And what the new Epic at that time was going to be was they were going to accept pitches from anyone. And I, being 19, thought, sure, I'll send a pitch to Marvel Comics and they'll want it. And I'll make that comic at Marvel. So I thought of this idea and I wrote the pitch and I sent it to Marvel. And of course they rejected it. But ever since then, I've never gotten this idea out of my head. And now I've kind of set it in my own world and built it out a lot more than that original pitch. But yeah, this idea has been swirling around in my head that whole time.
No, I love it. Let's go ahead and check out some of these tiers, and then we'll look at some of those tiers a little closer as well. So we can get the PDF for $10, a soft cover main cover early bird special at $14, and this is all 44 pages. You can get the soft cover variant by Erica Henderson at $16. We have the soft cover with signed at $25, both covers at $28, Rodrigo Vargas bundle at $42. So this includes both of the titles that you guys worked on together, correct?
That's right. It's got the Impostor Syndicate first and second issue together, and then it's got Everything Will Be Okay in there as well. So you can get both of the books we worked on together there.
That's awesome. And we have the Matt D. Wilson bundle as well. So what this is includes a Supreme Villainy?
That's right. Yeah. Supreme Villainy is the third King Oblivion PhD book, but you don't need to have read the first two. The first two were manuals for how to be a supervillain. Supreme Villainy is his autobiography. And I'm very, very proud of that book. And I think it's pretty funny. So hopefully people will want to get that. There are only three of those left.
A manual for being a supervillain. Matt, we're gonna have to do a background check on you. You're giving supervillain vibes.
I've always been completely fascinated by the mindset of the supervillain. Someone who fails and fails and fails and fails, but doesn't give up.
Right? I mean, you almost have to give them a little bit of credit because they just keep swinging at it. It's like if I had that much motivation, I would probably be somewhere a little bit higher too. So last but not least, we have a retail bundle, so you can get 5 copies of the soft cover at 57.5% off, so $34 for that. Some awesome add-ons right here too. So 5x8 commissioned by Rodrigo Vargas and get drawn into the comic for $300. So some awesome add-ons. 8x11 commission right here already on available too. So awesome tiers right here. And then let's take a look at some of these interiors. So this is the supervillain that he's taking on right here in this costume.
Yeah. Well, that's the supervillain he's becoming. Yeah. John will become the bonobo, and that's Erica Henderson's rendition of the bonobo. Mm-hmm. Erica is so great. People probably know her best from Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. But that's him. That's the bonobo in the midst of a bank robbery. His very first gig, which is soon to go pretty poorly for him, I think.
So I love the, it almost felt like a misdirection. So you have him right here. And then I felt like this was him right here underneath. I didn't realize like the hands were him.
Yeah, he's about to get punched on the main cover. On the main cover by Rodrigo, we see his eyes kind of out of costume, and then those are his hands in the bonobo costume, and that superhero that's about to punch him is named Webshot, and I don't think that's going to turn out well for him.
So these interiors are just absolutely gorgeous. Right here we have, I want to say, right there's the crocodile hitting the window, but even the WAP with the hat hitting the wall and just how it was etched into the wall was just chef kiss. I mean, so is Rodrigo the letterer on this as well, or do you have another person handling that?
Rodrigo's doing the lettering. Rodrigo colored these pages, although we are going to be working with a separate colorist for the rest of the book. Mm-hmm. So we're going to hire a colorist to work on probably recoloring these pages, but similarly to what they are right now, and then coloring all the rest of the art as Rodrigo does it, once he hopefully gets paid. the campaign being successful.
One of my favorite pages was here, where you have the outline of the head and the costume, and then the panels within it. It just was such a gorgeous scene. I mean, what was your direction for this? Was this you, or was this Rodrigo that came up with this idea?
The idea of the head shape was all Rodrigo. Essentially, the script for that page is just sort of like a preparation montage. You know, he's putting on the gloves, putting on the costume, getting his money bag, and walking out of the room with the contract he was given sitting on the desk. Rodrigo made it his head shape, and I think it is just like it's so indicative of Rodrigo just having this incredible creative visual style that makes everything better. I get the pages back and I just say this is better than I even imagined it to be, which is what every comic writer wants, you know.
And it's just remarkable that was a listener to your show first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And then I got to ask too. So the superhero right here is a little like reminiscent of someone you were talking about wanting to write for when for Marvel. Yeah. Was that like your little nod to that, or?
Oh yeah. I mean, when this was a Marvel pitch, I don't feel afraid to say, because he's obviously a satire parody version of Spider-Man now. The webs come out of his feet, and he's got a totally different costume, and he's a different guy, and he's a parody of Spider-Man. But in the original pitch, that was actually Spider-Man, and the villain that John became was the Gibbon, who is like this third stringer Marvel supervillain. I love the kind of scrub Marvel bad guys. So that's what he became in the original book, in the original pitch, and now he becomes the Bonobo, and it's a pretty different character from the Gibbon, but he is very much a nod to Spider-Man. In the second issue, we're introduced to a lot more kind of like fully original characters that are satirical takes on archetypes or superhero tropes, but they're not sort of one-to-one analogs like the two in this first issue.
You know, I gotta say, shooting webs from the feet would be awesome for when you don't want to like get up and put your socks and shoes on. You just use your feet, and like that'd be awesome. So for everyone that watching, right here is the link to check out this campaign. Be sure to back it today. If you're unable to back it, simply putting this on Facebook and Twitter. Word of mouth is 100% free. You have nothing to lose sharing this awesome project. So after going through this and checking out all those lovely interiors, Matt, what would you like to say to anyone who might be on the fence about backing? If you just had a few seconds to kind of address that.
If you're on the fence about backing, I would just say give it a shot, because Rodrigo's art is only going to get better, and you're gonna love what you see with his art. I feel like the number one selling point of this book is the artwork, and if there's one thing I would love to happen from this Zoop campaign, is for more people to become aware of just how good Rodrigo is, and for him to get more attention in the comics world. But also, as far as the story goes, it's a ride, and you're going to go on a ride. It's what you see in those preview pages is a lot of kind of like regular superhero punch 'em up stuff, and there is a lot of that in the book, but you're also going to get a story with a lot of laughs and a lot of big intrigue. I really love the ultimate mystery of the book, which is who is doing this, who is hiring these people to do this job. The job of going out and punching each other in the street. Like who is so interested in keeping this whole thing going? And that is an answer I have in my back pocket that I think will be satisfying for people. Ultimately, you're not going to get it in these first two issues, but by supporting the first two issues and helping us get them out there, that helps us continue the story later. And I will find it whatever way I can to make sure that this whole story gets told eventually.
So you mentioned 2 issues. I mean, what's next for you in 2023? Are we going to see any more installments from this series or any other projects you're working on?
I certainly hope to make more of this. This book is my focus right now. Depending on how things end up with the Zoop campaign, you know, if we end up with enough to not just fund these first 2 issues, but get things going on a third, I would be more than happy to keep that going and do it. That's really going to be my focus this year. This is a comic, like I said, it's 20 years in the making, and I've put it off for a long time, or gotten wrapped up in other projects, or gotten wrapped up in the day-to-day podcasting and my day job and whatever else has kind of been put in front of me. And I don't want to put off this book and this story anymore. I got to get this thing out of my head. And so that it's really going to be my focus this year. And if we can do more than just these 2, I would really love to make that happen.
That's awesome, Matt. Thank you so much for coming on, having such an awesome conversation, and talking about your book. Before we let you go, I always love asking for a little bit of advice. And, you mentioned that this book had a lot of reflection of some of the fears that you experienced, throughout your history as a creator. So for anyone out there maybe dealing with some fears within themselves, what advice would you offer to them to kind of help them work through that?
I think a lot of times people don't make creative work because they're worried that it's going to be bad.
Yep.
They're worried. They're worried that they're going to put it out in the world and it's going to be criticized, or it's going to be made fun of, or I had that fear too. But the truth is, whatever creative work you do first is going to be bad to mediocre. And you have to be okay with it. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it is, because you made something. And as soon as you've made something, it's easy to make the next thing. It's easier to make the next thing. And then you're creating more and more and more, and it becomes, and you get better at it. Because how do you get good at something? You do reps. You do it over and over and over again. So if you're somebody who wants to be a writer, wants to be an artist, and says, I'm an aspiring writer, for example, stop being an aspiring writer today and be a writer. Sit in front of the screen, sit in front of the blank screen, the blank page, and just start. And if you're worried that it looks bad, it's incoherent, you're not sure where it goes next, don't worry about that. Just whatever ideas you have, get them down, and you can put on your editor hat later and fix it. But anytime I hear anybody say I'm an aspiring writer, I'm inclined to say, why don't you just be a writer?
Yeah.
And do it. So that's my piece of advice. Get your reps in. If you're really embarrassed by the work when you're done with it, you don't have to show it to anybody, but finish something. And then it's that much easier to finish the next thing that will be better than the thing you did before.
I love it. Stop being inspiring and start being a writer today, guys. That was some awesome advice. Matt, real quick, where can everyone find your podcast too before we let you go? You brought it up a handful of times, but I haven't got a link yet. So give us that link and I'll make sure to update the description so people can go subscribe to you after the podcast.
Yeah, the website is just warrocketajax.com. It's that'll take you to our Zencastr page with all of our episodes. But also it's just, you can just search for War Rocket Ajax on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, where any podcast app that's out there, you can search for War Rocket Ajax and there it is.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much. Everyone watching, right there is the link. Be sure to back this awesome campaign today and hit him with a subscription too. Always love showing support and love to a fellow podcaster. Matt, thank you so much for swinging by. Everyone watching, I hope you all have a lovely Tuesday evening, but most importantly, guys, keep it geekly.